Right, for years, Scottish football fans have almost jokingly talked of their love affair with coefficient points, but we've seen the fruits of that labour from in recent times with automatic qualification into the Champions League from the champions of the Premiership and also guaranteeing European football for the sides finishing second and third. But with the ever-changing landscape of Scotland's place in football's elite, there has been one man with his finger firmly on the pulse, and he joins us now. Gavin from Scotland's Coefficient. Thanks for joining us, man. How are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm all right, man. I'm all right. First of all, what a week we've kind of seen from our Scottish sides. Um, and I think we start really where one of your tweets that came out last week was really kind of surprising, although maybe not surprising, that it's the first time ever three Scottish sides have registered three clean sheets in the same week in Europe. So we don't see a lot of positive news from our teams in Europe, but that's pretty special, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a fantastic week in terms of results. Obviously, most people expected after Celtic's match in Dortmund, where they obviously got heavily beat, that the same would happen again. So to start off with them getting a draw, a goalless draw, was a fantastic start. Obviously, Rangers and Hearts had weaker opposition, but they had to beat what was in front of them, and Hearts especially was a massive result for them to get that. So yeah, it's one of those stats that when I tweeted it out, I've not gone into the details, so it probably sounds better than it is because never before in the group stage have we had three teams get a clean sheet in the same week. Well, for that to happen, you need three teams in the group stage, and that's only happened three times before. So it wasn't hard for me to look back over the previous campaigns to find that. But nevertheless, there has been those campaigns, and we haven't managed it before. Last season was obviously the first time we managed three wins in the same week, and that was
Hmm.
in the final week. So both Celtic and Aberdeen's games were dead rubbers, but still. We got the three wins for the first time last season, and then now we've got three clean sheets in the same week for the first time.
It's amazing, really, isn't it? Because you think like what's the impact of those kind of points coefficient wise?
The main thing is that all three clubs need to stay in Europe for as long as possible to maximise the chance of getting points. So we've started the season 17th, which is really low, considering we've been ninth for years, a couple of years, and
Mm.
then 11th. To drop that far down because our best season in the last 5 years dropped off is going to need a massive season to climb up the rankings. So, like the instant impact of it was we overtook Israel in the rankings. So Israel have only got one team in who are doing terribly, so they're now below us. But it's more a long-term thing that it gives all three teams a massive platform to get to the knockout rounds, and that's when we'll really see right what are our chances, how high can we finish, because we'll know how many teams we have in the knockouts compared to everybody else, and how many wins or how far we need to progress. At this stage, you can't really tell exactly what those wins will mean, but like I say, they've all got a great platform now. I expect them all to get through to the knockout rounds in February, which will be the first time ever and be fantastic.
So where this new format sort of falls in maybe Scotland's team's favour a wee bit. But the way that it's been recently is obviously the champions of Scotland get automatic qualification at the Champions League, and then second and third are guaranteed European football. But what's the state of play at the moment? Because like you've mentioned it already, we've been as high as ninth in the coefficient table. We're as low as 17th now. So what are the kind of parameters that we as Scottish football fans should be worried about or hopeful for?
So hopeful is it's probably at its best just now. So the places that you get at the end of the current season are always based on where you finished last season. So last season we finished 11th, which means that we all the teams started this season knowing what was at stake at the end of the season. And the good thing about 11th is it's in the top 12. And top 12 means that the Scottish Cup winners are guaranteed the Conference League phase at least. If they lose their Europa League playoff, they drop into that. Once we go below 12, which is where we sit at the moment, but remember, we have until the end of this season to finalise our ranking for next season's places. If we end below 12th, then we lose that automatic place for our third force, I suppose you'd say, whoever wins the Scottish Cup. And the problem with that is that historically, Scottish teams have been really poor in qualifiers. They don't get through outside of Celtic and Rangers. They don't get through the qualifiers to get to the league phase. So positively, we've still got it this season. So whoever wins the Scottish Cup or finishes third, if it's one of the top two that win the Scottish Cup, that's great. Negatively, if we don't finish in the top 12 this season in the coefficient, it will be the last time for a while that we have the guaranteed league phase for the third place, and that would make me really worried in terms of future years, because all the sort of comparable nations, Czech Republic, Denmark, Norway, those sort of level of countries, they'll all be in the Conference League, and you'd expect them, they have the teams to get through the qualifiers and do well. And if we've only got two teams, Celtic and Rangers, you'd assume in the competitions, they're not going to be able to get enough points to sort of climb back up. So it's going to be a massive season, because we really need to try and keep three teams get an automatic qualification in the seasons to come.
Is there an impact that's already happened? So the champions of the Premiership this season, they won't get automatic qualification. Is that right?
That's right. So I probably should have started with that. 11th means that we're outside the top 10 for the first time in a few years. So we're Celtic, as the champions for the last 3 seasons, have been getting in automatically. Now that we've finished 11th last season, it means that this year's champions won't be automatically in. And whether that's Celtic, Aberdeen, Rangers, or Dundee United, is it them that are fourth? Any of them that win the league, they'll have to go through one qualifying round next season.
Yeah. Man, it's difficult. It's always been difficult. I remember those years where you're watching your teams and you're just like, why can't like Scottish teams perform better in these qualifiers? Because that's the thing, you always end up with a tougher team wherever the pots land. But how damaging then, looking at that, what you've just said, was match day 2 for us? Because it was just one of those where you're like, oh, for God's sake.
Yeah. It wasn't a great week, but I suppose in the same way that last week was really good, there wasn't a massive impact. So nobody got knocked out. We didn't fall any further than 17th in the rankings. So it was a bad week, but it is what it is. The main thing, as I said earlier, is that all three of them continue in Europe as long as possible, picking up as many wins as they can. And they're all still there in February or even hopefully March time to get us as high up the rankings as we can.
I want to go back, Gavin, to kind of like how you got into all of this stuff, because for a lot of people, like the real minutiae statistical information that's required to get into this is almost like it hurts my brain. So how does your brain enjoy this sort of thing? You know, how did you start like really kind of investing your life into it?
So yeah, my brain definitely works different than a lot of people. So I enjoy figures and numbers. So I've got 2 degrees. One was in accountancy and one was in international finance and accounting. Very numbers based. So it's this. I don't work in finance, so I don't actually enjoy that sort of accountancy stuff in terms of a job. But in terms of numbers, I'm good at it. So applying it in a boring accounting sense, I didn't enjoy, but applying a knowledge and understanding of numbers in a football sense, which I love, is right on my street. So all my life I've been interested in the coefficient. So there's a guy called Bert Cassis who's been like the godfather of the coefficient. He's had a website going, I can remember it on a desktop computer like 20 years ago or more. So I remember sitting, working it out, going on his website, seeing where we are and working out what our teams will get at the end of the season and everything. So I've always been interested in it. And as such, it's like in my head. So I'll listen back to this podcast once you release it. We'll see how good I am at trying to explain things. But in my head, it's crystal clear. But just trying to articulate that sometimes is maybe a bit harder, that what you're playing for this season affects you in the next season, all of that sort of stuff. So for me, it's really easy to know the impact of what's going to happen this season and next. What I've been trying to do through the Twitter page is to try and make that understandable in written format, picture format. I did a podcast for a little bit just to try and get more people to understand it, because obviously it affects all Scottish football fans that the teams are at the top end of the table. So it's appeals to a lot of people, but it's quite a complicated subject if you don't understand how it works, really.
Maybe we should get you on every European match week, and we can talk about it more. That'd be quite fun, actually. Because I'm an idiot, and this could be just teach an idiot segment.
Don't be harsh on yourself. It's if you don't read about it as often as I have over the years, it's definitely complicated, and you see it in the mainstream media and even with the commentators commentators and stuff, they try to like talk about it or get it, and it's so easy to make mistakes. So
Yeah.
it's definitely not, you're definitely not an idiot if you don't understand all of this straight away.
You must get a lot of people on Twitter kind of coming back at you saying like, no, that's not right because this happened or whatever.
Yeah, I get that quite a lot. Especially if it's like, I don't know, like something that's not a negative, but something that someone doesn't like about their team or their rivals team. So one of them,
Sure.
let's say, Celtic will earn X amount in Europe. That might upset fans of other clubs that say, I don't like internally, I don't want Celtic to earn that much. No, you must be wrong. It's not that much. This is what it is. And like, I've got all the UEFA documents that are sent to the clubs on my computer. I've worked it all out to the pound based on the facts. So
Mm,
I think in the early days, I would be like, very like, no, you're wrong. This is what it is. But sometimes I try to just ignore it at times if it's too overbearing, or as
yeah.
best I can explain to them where they're wrong and where the right information can be found.
It's interesting you say like you've got all the UEFA like documentation and stuff like that, and you've kind of had history of this. Bert Cassie's, was it? Bert, I've never heard of that before. Bert
Yeah,
Cassie's
Dutch
is a
guy.
Dutch guy website. Okay, that's amazing, man. Because I feel like not a lot of people know sometimes when you inform us, like goals matter. Draws and wins, obviously they matter, but they matter in a financial sense as well. Can you give us like a breakdown of that?
Yeah, so the financial figures are done on a cycle. So we've actually just started the new cycle, so the UEFA cycle 2024 to 2027. And in advance of that, UEFA produce like circular documents that get sent around all the clubs so that if they have someone like me employed at the club that's really into that, they could work out, well, if we get 3 wins, 4 wins, this is how much we'll earn. So there's a specific budget. So it is a budget, so it can change slightly, but historically it's rarely changed. And if anything, UEFA tend to err on the side of caution. So if they say that the starting fee is X million, it's always that, or maybe sometimes it's a little higher.
Mhm.
So UEFA have their budget, and then through their executive committee or whatever it is, they decide how they're going to split that money. And essentially, it's how do we keep the big clubs in the big countries happy? So they get their big pot,
Mhm.
they give like a token gesture to women's football, a token gesture to like clubs that don't qualify, solidarity payments to the teams within each league that don't play at all in Europe. That's nothing compared to the real money. They've got this big pot left, and they give 75% to the Champions League. They then give, I think it's 17% to the Europa League and 8% to the conference. That's why the drop off when Rangers, for example, who were the team in qualifying this year, some of the fans online might have been like, well, do you know what? We got absolutely scalped in the Champions League last time. We've been really good in the Europa League. Maybe it's for the best we just go in the Europa League. And in a competitive sense, that might be right. But in a financial sense, like Rangers would have earned over 50 million euros if they lost every game in the Champions League. They're
Mhm.
doing pretty well in the Europa at the moment. They're on 6 points, and they're only going to earn like 12 million euros. And even if they reach the final, it might get up to 16, 17, 18 million, but it'll be nothing like what they could have got in the Champions League. So
Mhm.
financially, it's a massive difference between the competitions. And like I say, this is all decided how the distribution will start at the start of the season. So you can use these documents to then work out exactly how much each club will earn as a minimum, and then the
Mhm.
money per draw and per win as they progress.
I suppose though, and you alluded to it, I think last year I remember seeing a tweet about you saying, this is all great that we've got automatic qualification to the Champions League. However, we've got that because we've been winning games in the lesser competition. Now that's going to be harder. So it's like there's the double-edged sword element to it as well, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just that, it's the higher up in the rankings you are, the less qualifiers you play. So, and
And
that's,
they all count
and
too.
points earned, yeah, they count for the country coefficient. So when Gerrard came into Rangers, Scotland was like, I don't know, 24th, 25th, really low. All of a sudden, he made Rangers good again in Europe. Them and Celtic won all these qualifying rounds every year to get into the competition. So before the tournament even started, our big two, and then even the third team, be that Aberdeen or whoever, won a couple of games, we were starting on like a really high number.
Hmm.
So even if we didn't do amazingly in the tournaments, and it just so happens that Celtic and Rangers did have years of getting out of the group stages and doing well together, added to all those qualifier points, we just flew up the rankings, and that's why we went from such a low number up to like 9th, 10th, 11th. So yeah, once you get there, it's a lot harder to maintain. That's why I pretty much resigned to the fact we won't get back in the top 10. It's too unattainable at the moment. We're too far off it, which is why we're aiming for the top 12, which helps the third team, whoever wins the Scottish Cup, to get guaranteed Conference League qualification.
What would have to happen for Scottish Premiership to have two teams in the Champions League? Like back in the good old days, like in the early 2000s, you'd have Celtic and Rangers in the group stages, yeah.
Automatic, that'll never happen. I think you need to be top like 7. I've stopped looking at it. It's not in my head because it's never going to happen.
Pointless,
so because
wow.
You've got the top leagues, and then the next leagues after that, Portugal, Belgium, we're just so far off them. So I would actually need to go back and check to find out exactly, is it 6th, 7th, 8th, wherever it is you need to be. We're not going to be there. Two teams in the Champions League at all, as in even in the qualifying rounds, you have to maintain 15th. So that's where we have such a cliff edge facing us, really. So where we're 17th, let's say we ended the season in 17th. Now that would be like a massive change to the budgeting that the clubs do, to everything, because at the moment, first and second will enter the Champions League at the end of this season, both in qualifiers. If we finished below 15th, then only first would enter Champions League qualifiers and second would enter the Conference League, and they'd have 3 qualifiers to get there. So if we have a bad season in Europe, like coefficient-wise, can't get in the top 15, and by the way, this is likely, we're probably on like a 50-50 chance of getting in the top 15 and not. Let's say we don't, then at the end of next season, second place has 3 qualifiers to get in the Conference League. And if that was, let's say it's Rangers, just because they've been second just now, that's then budgeting for guaranteed Europa League football this season with a chance of Champions League, to next season having 3 rounds even to reach the Conference League. And if they drew like a semi-decent team in qualifying and lost that, they'd be out of Europe in August. And that would be like, James, they're like one of our top performing European teams and they're out already. And the same would go for everyone else. So the champions would have 3 rounds to reach the Champions League. The cup winner would have 3 rounds or maybe even 4 rounds to get into the Europa League. So it's just
terrifying.
It would be really hard. Yeah, and that's the fear, because once we slip, it would be really hard to get back up, because everyone else will have teams in all 3 competitions doing, even if they're not doing great, but winning a game here and there, bonus points and all of that. And if we're still in qualifiers and maybe only Celtic reach the league phases, then it would be back to some dark days that we had in the past.
Well, if you do look back, anyone who does remember it's taken about 10 years for Scotland to get back to where we are now. Like, it wasn't, I think Celtic and Rangers were qualifying for the Champions League, or not qualifying, it was automatic, wasn't it? Like in 2003, 4, and then even then afterwards, I think I only really remember Celtic being in the Champions League early 2010s, and then halfway through the 10s, it's just been a nightmare. But how does this what about the national team, Gavin? Like, does that play any part in all of this, or is there a separate international coefficient?
Yeah, completely separate. So this is the UEFA coefficient with all the clubs. FIFA have FIFA World Rankings, and they've got like a much more complicated formula. I don't actually understand it. I know it exists. I know where to get it. And basically, so in UEFA's coefficient, it doesn't matter who you beat. It's the same amount of points if you win in any of the 3 competitions. If you beat Barcelona or you beat an Icelandic team, it's the same amount of points. In FIFA's rankings, if you're a really low ranked team and you beat a really high ranked team, you'll earn more points. And similarly, if you're ranked up high and you lose to a low ranked team, so England just lost to Greece at home, so they would have lost a lot more points than we would have lost for losing to Portugal or someone like that. So national teams completely different to the club team, not linked in any way. But of course, if you're a Scottish football fan, you've probably got an interest in both.
I like how you love your numbers, but you're like, nah, that's too much, man.